The frozen body lying in the snow looked already dead when Owen Callahan first spotted her from atop his chestnut mare. But something made him dismount anyway on that bitter January morning in 1877. The storm had passed through southern Arizona territory the night before, a rare and vicious thing that left the desert hills around Old Tucson blanketed in white. And he had been riding out to check on his cattle when he saw the dark shape half buried in a drift near a cluster of rocks. Owen dropped to his knees beside her, brushing snow from her face with hands already numb despite his leather gloves. She was Apache, young, maybe 19 or 20 years old, with long black hair frozen stiff around her shoulders. Her buckskin dress was torn and blood-stained, and her lips had gone blue, but when he pressed 2 fingers to her throat, he felt the faintest flutter of a pulse. "Come on now," he muttered, scooping her up in his arms. She weighed almost nothing, and her skin felt like ice even through his coat. He whistled for his horse, who trotted over obediently, and somehow managed to haul himself and the unconscious girl into the saddle. He held her against his chest as he turned the mare toward home, spurring her into a gallop despite the treacherous snow. His cabin sat in a sheltered valley about 3 miles from Old Tucson, a sturdy log structure he had built himself when he was 21, 4 years ago now. Smoke still rose from the chimney, which meant the fire had not died completely, and he thanked God for small mercies as he kicked open the door and carried the girl inside. Owen laid her on his bed near the hearth and immediately set about building up the fire. Once flames were leaping high, he turned back to her, knowing he needed to get her out of those wet clothes before hypothermia finished what the storm had started. His hands shook slightly as he worked, not from cold but from the intimacy of the act, but he kept his thoughts clinical and his touch respectful. He wrapped her in every blanket he owned, then heated water and held a cup to her lips, coaxing small sips down her throat. For hours she lay there, barely breathing, while Owen sat beside the bed and willed her to live. He had no idea who she was or how she had ended up alone in the snow, but something in him knew that finding her meant something, that letting her die was not an option. Outside, the winter sun climbed high and began its descent, and still she did not wake. Then, as the room filled with the orange glow of sunset, her eyes opened. They were dark and deep, like pools of creek water at midnight, and they fixed on his face with an intensity that made his breath catch. She studied him for a long moment, taking in his sandy brown hair, his blue eyes, the worry etched across his weathered features. "You saved me," she said in English, her voice hoarse but clear. "I found you in the snow," Owen replied, leaning forward. "How do you feel?" "Cold. Tired." She tried to sit up, winced, and fell back against the pillows. "My name is Grace Dalton." Owen blinked in surprise. The name was English, not Apache, though everything else about her spoke of tribal heritage. "Owen Callahan," he said. "You are safe here. What happened to you?" Grace closed her eyes, and for a moment he thought she had slipped back into unconsciousness, but then she spoke again. "My mother was Apache. My father was a white trader who lived with her people for many years. When I was 10, he took me to live in Tucson, gave me his name, taught me his language and his ways. He died 2 years ago. I have been living between both worlds ever since. And the storm. I was riding back from my mother's village when it hit. My horse threw me and ran off. I tried to find shelter, but everything looked the same in the snow. I thought I would die." She opened her eyes again and looked at him. "Why did you help me?" Owen considered the question. "Because it was the right thing to do. Many men would have left an Apache woman to freeze." "I am not many men." Something shifted in her expression, a softening around her eyes. "No," she agreed quietly, "you are not." Over the next few days, Grace regained her strength. Owen gave her his bed while he slept on the floor near the fire, and he brought her bowls of stew and strong coffee while she recovered. They talked during those long winter evenings, sharing stories of their lives. She told him about growing up between two cultures, never quite belonging to either, and he told her about losing his parents to cholera when he was 18 and building his ranch from nothing with his own two hands. "You get lonely out here?" Grace asked one night, wrapped in blankets and watching him whittle by the firelight. Owen shrugged. "Sometimes, but I like the quiet. Town can be hard for a man who does not enjoy idle chatter. Or for a woman caught between two peoples," Grace said softly. He looked up at her then, really looked at her, and saw past the beautiful features to the loneliness that matched his own. "Maybe we are both misfits," he said. "Maybe that is why you found me," she replied. "Maybe God knew we needed each other." The words hung in the air between them, charged with possibility. Owen set down his knife and the piece of wood he had been shaping. "Grace, I have been thinking. When you are well enough to travel, I will take you wherever you want to go. But if you wanted to stay here for a while longer, I would not mind the company." She smiled, and it transformed her face from merely lovely to radiant. "I would like that very much." A week passed, then two. The snow melted under a warming sun, and Grace grew strong enough to move around the cabin, then to walk outside in the crisp morning air. She proved handy with a needle and thread, mending Owen's shirts and the holes in his socks, and she taught him how to make flat bread the way her mother had taught her. He showed her how to handle his rifle and took her riding on his gentlest horse, a gray gelding named Smoke. They developed a rhythm, a comfortable domesticity that felt as natural as breathing. Owen would rise before dawn to tend his small herd of cattle, and Grace would have coffee waiting when he returned for breakfast. They would work together during the day, repairing fences or tending the vegetable garden she insisted on starting. And in the evenings, they would sit by the fire and talk until the logs burned down to embers. "I should leave soon," Grace said one night in early March, though her voice held no conviction. "Why?" Owen asked, looking up from the harness he was oiling. "Because people will talk. A white man and an Apache woman living together without being married. It will damage your reputation." "I do not care much for what people think. You should. This is your home, your livelihood. I will not let my presence here cause you trouble." Owen set down the harness and moved to sit beside her on the bench. "Grace, I have something to say, and I want you to hear me out before you answer. These past weeks with you here have been the happiest of my life. I know we have not known each other long, but I feel like I have been waiting for you without even knowing it. You fit here with me in a way I cannot fully explain. So I am asking you to stay, not as a guest, but as my wife. Marry me, Grace. Let me spend the rest of my days making you happy." She stared at him, eyes wide with surprise, and for a terrible moment Owen thought he had misread everything, had made a fool of himself. But then she reached out and took his hand, threading her fingers through his. "I will be yours," she said simply. Joy flooded through him, so intense it was almost painful. "I will be yours forever," he promised, bringing her hand to his lips. They married a week later in Old Tucson, standing before the circuit judge in his small office while two strangers served as witnesses. Grace wore a simple blue dress that Owen had bought for her at the general store, and he wore his best shirt and string tie. The ceremony lasted maybe 5 minutes, but when the judge pronounced them husband and wife and Owen kissed Grace for the first time, it felt like the most sacred moment of his life. Walking back through town afterward, Grace's hand tucked into the crook of his arm, Owen was aware of the stares they attracted. Some people looked merely curious, others openly hostile. An older woman actually spat on the ground as they passed, and a man muttered something about savages that made Owen's jaw clench. But Grace kept her head high, and Owen felt fierce pride in her courage. "Let them stare," he murmured to her. "You are my wife, and I will be damned if anyone makes you feel less than the treasure you are." She squeezed his arm. "I am not afraid of their judgment. I have lived with it all my life." They stopped at the general store to pick up supplies, and the proprietor, a portly man named Harold Smith, greeted them with surprising warmth. "Heard you two got hitched," he said, counting out their change. "Congratulations, Callahan. You are getting a good woman from what I hear." She helped old Mrs. Peterson with her rheumatism last week, made her some kind of poultice that worked better than anything Doc Reynolds had given her. Owen glanced at Grace in surprise, and she flushed slightly. "I went to town a few times while you were working with the cattle," she admitted. "Mrs. Peterson was kind to me at the church social. I wanted to repay her kindness." "Well, the whole town is talking about it," Smith continued. "You have made yourself some friends, Mrs. Callahan, though I will not lie and say everyone is pleased about your marriage. But the folks whose opinions matter are happy for you both." As they loaded their supplies into the wagon, Owen felt some of the tension leave his shoulders. Maybe their life together would not be as difficult as he had feared. Maybe love was enough to bridge any divide. The spring passed in a haze of contentment. Owen's cattle herd grew, and with Grace's help, they planted a larger garden and even added some chickens to the homestead. She proved to have a gift with animals, gentling a wild Mustang stallion that Owen had been ready to give up on, and the horse became her personal mount. A spirited paint she named Storm in honor of the blizzard that had brought her into Owen's life. They fell into the easy intimacy of marriage, learning each other's bodies and hearts with equal enthusiasm. Owen had been with women before, brief encounters in his younger days that had been more about physical release than emotional connection, but making love to Grace was entirely different. She was passionate and uninhibited, meeting him as an equal partner, and the depth of feeling between them made every touch sacred. In late May, Grace's mother and several members of her Apache family came to visit. Owen had been nervous about meeting them, unsure of how they would receive him, but the old woman who dismounted from her pony and studied him with sharp black eyes eventually nodded in approval. "You are the one who saved my daughter from the snow," she said in heavily accented English. She was probably in her mid-50s, her face lined from years in the sun, but she moved with the grace and strength of someone much younger. "Grace has told me of your kindness." "I am honored to meet you," Owen said, bowing his head respectfully. "Grace speaks of you often." "My daughter has chosen to walk the white man's road. This has been hard for her, hard for our family, but I see she is happy with you, so my heart is less troubled." She reached out and gripped his forearm with surprising strength. "You will protect her always, with my life," Owen vowed. The visit lasted 3 days, during which Owen gained a deeper understanding of Grace's heritage and the complicated path she walked. Her Apache relatives were polite but reserved with him, watching to see how he treated Grace, how he spoke to her, whether he saw her as an equal or a possession. By the time they left, he felt he had earned a measure of their respect, and the old woman embraced him before mounting her pony. "You are a good man, Owen Callahan," she said. "May you and my daughter have many years of happiness and many strong children to carry on both your bloodlines." That night, lying in bed with Grace's head on his chest, Owen asked, "Do you regret marrying me, leaving your mother's world behind?" Grace propped herself up on one elbow to look at him. "I have not left it behind. It is part of who I am, just as my father's world is part of me." "You do not ask me to choose, Owen. You accept all of me. That is why I love you." "I do love you," he said, the words still feeling new and wonderful on his tongue. More than I knew it was possible to love another person. She kissed him then, slow and deep, and they made love as the spring wind whispered through the pines outside their window. Summer arrived with its brutal heat, baking the Arizona desert until the ground cracked and the cattle sought shade in the rare patches of trees. Owen and Grace developed a routine of working in the early morning and late evening, spending the hottest part of the day inside the cabin where it was marginally cooler. They would read to each other from the few books Owen owned, or Grace would teach him words in the Apache language, or they would simply talk about their dreams for the future. "I want children," Grace said one afternoon in late July as they lay on top of the covers, too hot to bear even a sheet over them. 3 or 4 at least, a house full of noise and laughter. Owen turned his head to look at her. "I want that too. I want to see you round with my baby, want to teach our sons and daughters to ride and rope and live off this land. Sons and daughters who will belong to both our worlds," Grace said thoughtfully, "who will never have to choose like I did. We will make sure of it," Owen promised. In August, Grace began feeling sick in the mornings. At first, she thought it was something she had eaten, but when the nausea persisted for a week and her monthly bleeding did not come, they looked at each other with dawning realization and joy. "I am with child," Grace whispered, her hands going to her still flat belly. Owen let out a whoop of pure happiness and swept her up in his arms, spinning her around until she laughed and begged him to put her down. "We are going to have a baby," he said, cupping her face in his hands. "Grace, you have made me the happiest man alive." The pregnancy progressed smoothly through the fall. Grace bloomed, her skin glowing and her eyes bright with contentment. Owen fussed over her constantly, trying to keep her from doing heavy work, though she insisted she was perfectly capable of her normal chores. "Apache women work until the baby comes," she told him when he protested her hauling water from the well. "I will not sit idle like some fragile doll." "I know you are strong," Owen said, "but let me take care of you anyway. It makes me feel useful." She relented with a smile, allowing him to pamper her in small ways while still maintaining her independence. They spent the evenings preparing for the baby's arrival, with Owen building a beautiful wooden cradle and Grace sewing tiny clothes from soft fabric they bought in town. Word of Grace's pregnancy spread through Old Tucson, and to Owen's surprise and gratitude, several women from town came calling with gifts and advice. Mrs. Peterson, the elderly woman Grace had helped months before, became a particular friend, stopping by regularly to check on Grace and share wisdom from her own 6 pregnancies. "You have done good work here, child," she told Grace one afternoon over tea. "People were suspicious of you at first, I will not lie, but you have shown yourself to be a woman of character and kindness. This baby will be welcomed by more folks than you might think." Not everyone was accepting, of course. Owen still encountered hostile stares in town, and once a drunk cowboy made a crude comment about half-breed babies that ended with Owen's fist connecting with the man's jaw. But the justice of the peace ruled its self-defense after several witnesses testified to the cowboy's provocation, and the incident seemed to establish once and for all that Owen would tolerate no disrespect toward his wife. Winter came again, gentler than the year before, and in late February of 1878, Grace went into labor. Mrs. Peterson and another experienced midwife named Sarah Johnson came to help, banishing Owen from the cabin while Grace's cries of pain tore at his heart. He paced outside in the cold for hours, praying to every deity he could think of to keep Grace and the baby safe. Finally, as dawn broke over the desert, he heard a new sound, the thin, indignant wail of a newborn. Moments later, Mrs. Peterson emerged from the cabin, her face tired but smiling. "You have a son," she announced, "and your wife is asking for you." Owen rushed inside to find Grace propped up in bed, exhausted but radiant, cradling a tiny bundle wrapped in a blanket. He approached slowly, almost reverently, and looked down at the red, wrinkled face of his firstborn child. "He is perfect," he breathed. "Grace, he is perfect. We should name him," she said, smiling up at him. "I was thinking William after my father." "William Callahan," Owen said, testing the name. "It suits him." He carefully took the baby from Grace's arms, marveling at how light and fragile his son felt. "Hello, William. I am your father, and I promise I will do everything in my power to give you a good life." The baby squinted up at him, and Owen could have sworn he saw intelligence in those dark eyes. He handed William back to Grace and climbed into bed beside them, wrapping his arms around his wife and son. "Thank you," he whispered into Grace's hair. "Thank you for this gift." Fatherhood transformed Owen in ways he had not expected. He had always been responsible and hardworking, but now he felt driven by a deeper purpose. Everything he did was for his family, for building a legacy that William would inherit. He expanded the ranch, buying more land and cattle, working himself nearly to exhaustion to ensure financial security. Grace, meanwhile, threw herself into motherhood with the same fierce competence she brought to everything else. She nursed William, sang to him in both English and Apache, and taught him to laugh with silly games and gentle tickling. Watching her with their son filled Owen with such love it sometimes felt like his chest might burst from the pressure of it. When William was 6 months old, Grace's mother came to visit again, this time with Grace's younger brother, a serious young man of 19 named Running Deer. They stayed for a week, and Owen watched as the old woman held her grandson and sang traditional songs over him, blessing him in the Apache way. "He carries the blood of 2 peoples," she said to Owen on the last night of their visit. "This will be both a gift and a burden. You must teach him to walk with pride in both worlds, to see his mixed heritage as strength, not weakness." "I will," Owen promised. "Grace and I want him to know and honor both sides of his family." Running Deer, who had been quiet for most of the visit, spoke up then. "There is talk among some of the younger warriors of fighting back against the white settlers. They are angry about the reservation boundaries, about broken treaties. I do not know if they will act on this talk, but if they do, it could be dangerous for Grace and the child." Owen felt ice form in his stomach. "What are you saying?" "Only that you should be watchful. Some of our people see Grace as a traitor for marrying a white man. If there is violence, they may not distinguish between you and other settlers." "I will protect my family," Owen said firmly. "But I hope it does not come to that. There has been enough bloodshed in this territory." Running Deer nodded slowly. "I agree. That is why I tell you this, so you can be prepared. Grace is my sister, and though I do not fully understand her choice, I want her to be safe." After Grace's family left, Owen took Running Deer's warning to heart. He started carrying his rifle everywhere, even when working close to the cabin, and he made sure Grace knew how to shoot and reload should the need arise. She understood the precautions without him having to explain. Her own awareness of the tensions between whites and Apache is making her equally vigilant. But months passed without incident, and gradually they relaxed back into their peaceful routine. William grew into a happy, healthy toddler with his mother's dark eyes and his father's sandy hair, a beautiful blend of both his parents. He took his first steps on a warm day in October, lurching from Grace's arms into Owen's with a delighted laugh, and Owen felt tears prick his eyes at the milestone. "He is going to be walking everywhere now," Grace said, watching William toddle around the cabin with intense concentration. We will have to watch him every moment." "I do not mind," Owen said, scooping up his son and tossing him gently into the air, making William shriek with glee. Every stage is a gift. In the spring of 1880, Grace became pregnant again. This time she knew what to expect, and though the morning sickness was worse than before, she bore it with good humor. Owen was just as attentive as he had been the first time, maybe more so, and William seemed to sense something special was happening, patting his mother's growing belly with gentle hands. "Baby," Grace taught him to say. "You are going to have a baby brother or sister." Their second child, a daughter they named Caroline, arrived in early November after a shorter and easier labor than William's birth. She had Grace's features and coloring but Owen's blue eyes, a striking combination that made strangers stop and stare. Owen fell in love with her instantly, amazed at how his heart had expanded to encompass this new little person without taking any love away from William or Grace. "Our family is complete," Grace said one night, nursing Caroline while William slept in his small bed across the room. "Two healthy children, a good home, a husband I love. What more could I want?" "Nothing," Owen agreed, though he knew life could always surprise them with its twists and turns. The years rolled on, each one bringing new joys and challenges. William grew tall and strong, showing early aptitude with horses and livestock, while Caroline proved to have her mother's gift with plants and healing. They were happy children, confident and loved, and Owen often marveled at how different their childhood was from his own lonely upbringing. In 1883, when William was 5 and Caroline nearly 3, the territorial governor announced new policies regarding Apache reservations that caused tensions to rise dramatically throughout southern Arizona. Several prominent Apache leaders were arrested on questionable charges, and scattered violence broke out as warriors retaliated. Owen kept his family close to home during this period, making his trips to town as brief as possible. He could feel the hostility in Old Tucson increasing, with some white settlers viewing all Apaches as dangerous, even those like Grace who had lived peacefully among them for years. Twice he got into confrontations with men who made insulting remarks about his wife, and the second time resulted in him sporting a black eye for a week after the disagreement turned physical. "Maybe we should move," Grace suggested quietly one evening after the children were asleep. "Go somewhere there is less tension, fewer people who know us." Owen considered it. "Where would we go? This ranch is our home. I built it with my own hands, and I will not be driven off by bigots and fools." "I do not want the children to grow up surrounded by hatred," Grace said, her voice tight with worry. "They won't. Things will calm down once the territorial government works out this mess with the reservation boundaries. We just need to weather this storm like we have weathered others before." Grace nodded, but Owen could see the fear lingering in her eyes. That night he held her close, silently vowing that he would do whatever it took to keep his family safe. The storm, when it came, was not from an expected direction. In late August, a group of 3 white men rode up to the ranch while Owen was out checking fences in the south pasture. Grace was home alone with the children, hanging laundry in the yard, when the men dismounted and approached her. "You the Apache woman married to Callahan?" The largest of them asked. He was about 40 with a scar across his cheek and mean eyes. Grace felt fear spike through her, but she kept her voice steady. "I am Grace Callahan. What do you want?" "Just wanted to deliver a message," the man said, stepping closer. "Some of us think it is high time you and your half-breed spawn left this territory. Go back to your people on the reservation where you belong." "This is my home," Grace said, standing her ground though her heart was racing. "My husband and I own this land legally." "Your husband is a traitor to his race," another man spat, Marrying a savage, having savage children, it is unnatural. William, who had been playing near the cabin, came running over at the sound of raised voices. "Mama!" The man with the scar looked down at William and sneered. "This the boy? Does not look much like an Indian to me." "Leave," Grace said, her voice sharp now. "Get off our property before my husband returns." The man laughed. "Or what? You will shoot us with your savage arrows." He reached out as if to grab William, and Grace moved with the speed of a striking snake, producing a knife from her belt and holding it to the man's wrist. "Touch my son and I will cut off your hand," she said, her voice cold and deadly serious. The man pulled back, his face flushing with anger. "You threatening me? I am promising you. Now leave, all of you, before someone gets hurt." For a tense moment, the three men stood there, and Grace thought they might attack anyway. But then the sound of hoofbeats reached them, and Owen came galloping up on his horse, rifle already in hand. He took in the scene at a glance and leveled his weapon at the men. "I believe my wife told you to leave," he said, his voice dangerously quiet. "I suggest you do so now." The man with the scar opened his mouth as if to argue, then seemed to think better of it. "This is not over, Callahan. People are talking. You best watch your back." "I will watch my family," Owen replied. "And if any of you come near them again, you will be the ones watching your backs. Now ride out." The men mounted their horses and left at a leisurely pace, clearly trying to maintain some semblance of dignity. As soon as they were out of sight, Owen jumped down from his horse and pulled Grace and William into his arms. "Are you hurt? Did they touch you?" "We are fine," Grace said, though her hands were shaking now that the danger had passed. "But Owen, this is getting worse. Those men meant us harm." Owen held his family close, feeling fury and fear war within him. I know, and I am sorry. This should not be happening." That night, after the children were asleep, Owen and Grace had a long, difficult conversation about their future. They weighed the options: stay and fight for their home, or leave and start fresh somewhere else. It was Grace who finally made the decision. "We stay," she said firmly. "If we run now, we teach our children that fear and hatred win. We stay and show them that love and courage are stronger. This is our home, Owen. We do not abandon it. Even if it is dangerous, life is always dangerous. We face it together as we always have." Owen kissed her, deeply grateful for her strength and conviction. "Then we stay, but we take precautions. I will hire a hand or two to help around the ranch, men who can also watch the property when I am away. And I am going to talk to the sheriff, make sure he knows we have been threatened." Sheriff Tom Martinez was a fair man who had always treated Grace with respect, and when Owen went to him the next day, he listened gravely to the account of what had happened. "I can have a deputy ride out there occasionally, keep an eye on things," Martinez offered. "And I will spread the word that any violence against your family will be met with the full force of the law. But Callahan, I will be honest with you. Feelings are running high right now. Some folks are looking for an excuse to cause trouble, and an Apache woman married to a white man makes an easy target." "Grace is more than just an Apache woman," Owen said, his voice tight with anger. "She is a person, my wife, the mother of my children." "Why is that so hard for people to understand?" Martinez sighed. "Because fear makes people stupid. They see the raids on the frontier, hear about the killings, and they want someone to blame. They do not care about individuals or circumstances. They just want a target for their fear." "Well, my family will not be that target," Owen said flatly. "I will protect them by any means necessary." "I do not doubt it. Just try not to kill anyone if you can help it. Makes a lot of paperwork for me." Despite the grim humor, Owen left the sheriff's office feeling somewhat reassured. Martinez was a good man, and knowing he was watching out for them helped. Owen also hired 2 ranch hands, both young men in their early 20s who had worked for him briefly before. They were good workers and, more importantly, they treated Grace with courtesy and did not seem bothered by her heritage. The presence of hired help meant that Grace and the children were rarely alone, which eased some of Owen's constant worry. Life settled into a new normal, though always with an undercurrent of tension. Grace started teaching William and Caroline more about their Apache heritage, telling them stories of her mother's people and teaching them words in the language. She wanted them to be proud of who they were, to have the pride and knowledge to face down any prejudice they might encounter. In the spring of 1885, when William was 7 and Caroline 5, Grace discovered she was pregnant again. The news was both joyful and concerning, given the tension still simmering in the territory, but they accepted it as the blessing it was. This pregnancy was harder than the previous 2, with Grace suffering from fatigue and back pain that made her daily tasks difficult. Owen hired a woman from town, a widow named Martha Reeves, to come help with the housework and care for the children while Grace rested. Martha was in her mid-40s and had raised 5 children of her own. She was practical and kind, treating Grace with the same matter-of-fact respect she showed everyone. "You just focus on growing that baby," Martha told Grace. "I will handle the rest. Lord knows I have cooked and cleaned enough in my life to do it with my eyes closed." Under Martha's capable care, the household ran smoothly through the summer and into the fall. Grace's belly grew round and heavy, and she spent more time resting, reading stories to William and Caroline and teaching them letters and numbers. Owen would come in from working the ranch to find his family in various states of peaceful occupation, and his heart would swell with love for them. In October, Grace went into labor a few weeks earlier than expected. The birth was long and difficult, with complications that had both the midwife and Owen genuinely frightened. For hours Grace labored, growing weaker, until finally, with one last mighty effort, she delivered a tiny but healthy baby boy. "Another son," the midwife announced, placing the baby on Grace's chest. "Small but with good lungs, hear him cry." But Owen was more concerned with Grace, who looked gray and exhausted. "Will she be all right?" he asked urgently. "She needs rest and care, but yes, I believe so. The bleeding has slowed. Keep her quiet for the next few weeks. Make sure she eats well and sleeps. She is strong, this one." They named the baby Thomas after Owen's father, and he proved to be a quiet, watchful infant who seemed content to observe the world around him with solemn, dark eyes. William and Caroline doted on their baby brother, wanting to help with everything from changing his cloth diapers to singing him lullabies. Grace recovered slowly from the difficult birth, but by Christmas, she was back to her usual energy levels. The family celebrated with a modest feast and simple gifts, grateful to be together and healthy. Owen looked around the table at his wife and 3 children and felt such profound thankfulness it nearly overwhelmed him. "What are you thinking?" Grace asked softly, noticing his expression. "That I am the luckiest man alive," he replied honestly. 10 years ago I was alone, just trying to survive day to day. Now I have you, our children, this life we built together. Sometimes I can barely believe it is real." "It is real," Grace said, reaching across to squeeze his hand. "And it is good. Despite all the difficulties, all the people who have tried to make us feel ashamed or unwelcome, we have built something beautiful here." "We have," Owen agreed. "And I will spend the rest of my life being grateful for the day I found you in the snow." The years continued to pass, bringing both good times and challenges. The territorial government's policies toward the Apache gradually shifted, sometimes for better and sometimes for worse, but the Callahan family weathered it all. Owen's ranch prospered as he proved himself a shrewd businessman and capable rancher. He eventually bought out a neighboring property, expanding his holdings substantially. William grew into a responsible young man who shared his father's love of ranching, while Caroline showed talent for teaching and began helping other children in the area learn to read and write. Thomas, though quieter than his siblings, proved to have a gift for working with his hands, able to fix nearly anything mechanical that broke. In 1892, when William was 14 and showing interest in girls from town, Owen sat him down for a serious talk. "You need to understand something, son. Not everyone is going to accept you the way we hope they will. Some people will judge you for having an Apache mother, will say cruel things or treat you poorly because of it." William listened seriously. He was tall for his age, already nearly Owen's height, with his father's build and his mother's coloring. "I know, Pa. I have heard things in town, seen how some people look at Ma and at us. But you and Ma taught us to be proud of who we are, to not let other people's ignorance define us." Owen felt pride swell in his chest. "That is right. But I also want you to know that if you ever face real trouble because of your heritage, you come to me or your mother. We will stand with you always." "I know that, Pa. I have always known that." Caroline, who had been listening from her seat by the window, spoke up. "Will it always be like this? Will people always judge us for being mixed?" It was Grace who answered, coming into the room with Thomas trailing behind her. "Maybe not always, daughter. The world changes, slowly, but it does change. What we can control is how we respond to prejudice. We meet it with dignity and strength, and we teach our children, your children someday, to do the same." "I want to teach," Caroline said suddenly. "Really teach, not just help children in the kitchen. I want to open a school where any child can come, white or Apache or Mexican, and learn together." "That is a fine dream," Owen said. "And if that is what you want, your mother and I will help you achieve it." In 1895, the family received word that Grace's mother had passed away peacefully in her sleep at the age of 72. Grace grieved deeply for the woman who had given her life and taught her to navigate two worlds, and the entire family traveled to the Apache village for the funeral. It was Owen's first time visiting the reservation, and he was struck by both the poverty he saw there and the dignity with which people faced their circumstances. Running Deer, now a mature man of 36 with children of his own, embraced Owen warmly. "You have been a good husband to my sister," he said. "Our mother died knowing Grace was happy and safe. That gave her peace." The visit lasted a week, and Owen watched as his children learned more about their Apache heritage, hearing stories from elders and participating in traditional ceremonies. It reinforced for him the importance of what Grace had been teaching them all along, that their mixed heritage was not something to hide but something to celebrate. On the journey home, William said thoughtfully, "I want to learn more about Ma's people, their ways, their language, all of it." "Will you teach me, Ma?" Grace smiled through her grief. "Of course, my son. I would be honored." In 1897, as the century drew toward its close, Owen and Grace celebrated their 20th wedding anniversary. They were both in their mid-40s now, with threads of gray in their hair and lines around their eyes, but Owen thought Grace had only grown more beautiful with age. She carried herself with a confidence and grace that turned heads in town, and he was still as much in love with her as he had been that day she opened her eyes in his cabin and changed his life forever. They hosted a party at the ranch, inviting friends and neighbors from throughout the territory. To Owen's gratification, nearly everyone they invited came, bringing gifts and good wishes. Even some people who had initially been hostile to their marriage made an appearance, having gradually come to accept and respect the Callahans over the years. Sheriff Martinez, now graying and talking about retirement, raised a glass in toast. To Owen and Grace Callahan, who proved that love can bridge any divide and that family is built on choice and commitment, not just blood. May you have many more years of happiness together. "Hear, hear," echoed through the crowd, and Owen pulled Grace close, kissing her soundly to the accompaniment of cheers and laughter. That night, lying in bed in the room they had shared for 2 decades, Grace said softly, "Did you ever imagine our life would turn out like this?" "Never," Owen admitted. "When I found you in the snow, I had no idea you would become my whole world, but you did, Grace. You and our children, you are everything to me." "And you to me," she replied. "You saved my life that day, Owen. Not just from freezing to death, but from loneliness, from never belonging anywhere. You gave me a home, a family, a place where I fit perfectly." They made love then, slowly and tenderly, reaffirming the vows they had spoken 20 years before. Afterward, Grace lay with her head on Owen's shoulder, listening to his heartbeat, and felt completely at peace. The new century arrived with great fanfare and celebration. Owen and Grace stood with their children, watching fireworks light up the sky over Old Tucson on New Year's Eve 1900, marveling at how much had changed since they first met. William was 22 now, and courting a young woman from town named Sarah Miller, whose family owned the bank. Caroline was 20 and had indeed opened her small school, teaching children of all backgrounds in a building Owen had built for her on a corner of the ranch property. Thomas, at 15, was already as tall as his father and showing promise as both a rancher and a craftsman. "We did it," Grace murmured to Owen as the fireworks exploded overhead. "We built a good life, raised good children. Against all odds, we succeeded." "Because we had love," Owen replied. "That is what made the difference. No matter what we faced it together with love." In 1902, William married Sarah in a large ceremony in Old Tucson, with Owen standing proudly as best man and Grace weeping happy tears as she watched her firstborn take this important step. A year later, they announced that Sarah was pregnant, and Owen and Grace found themselves preparing to become grandparents. The baby, a girl they named Emma Grace after her grandmother, arrived in the spring of 1903. Owen held his granddaughter for the first time and felt his eyes grow wet with tears. The circle of life continued, bringing new joy and new possibilities. Caroline married in 1904, choosing a quiet ceremony at the ranch. Her husband was a teacher from back east who had come to Arizona for his health and stayed for her. They planned to run the school together, expanding it to serve even more children in the territory. Thomas, showing no immediate interest in marriage, took over more and more of the ranch operations as Owen began to slow down. At 52, Owen found he could not work the long hours he once had, but he was content to hand off responsibilities to his capable son. In 1908, Grace fell seriously ill with pneumonia. For 2 terrifying weeks, Owen barely left her bedside, holding her hand and willing her to fight. The children took turns sitting with her, and Sarah brought baby Emma to visit, the child's laughter seeming to bring light into the sickroom. Slowly, painfully, Grace recovered, but the illness had taken a toll, leaving her frailer than before. Owen insisted she rest more, take on fewer tasks, though Grace chafed at the restrictions. "I am not an invalid," she protested. "No, but you are not invincible either," Owen replied gently. "Let us take care of you for a change. You have spent 30 years taking care of everyone else." As Grace's health gradually improved, Owen found himself thinking more about their mortality. They were both in their mid-50s now, and though he hoped they had many years left together, he knew nothing was guaranteed. One evening, Sitting on the porch and watching the sunset paint the desert in shades of gold and red, he said, "Grace, I need you to know something. These years with you have been the greatest gift of my life. Whatever time we have left, whether it is 30 years or 30 days, I am grateful for every moment." Grace took his hand, threading her fingers through his. "I feel the same way. You know, sometimes I still think about that day you found me in the snow. I was so close to dying, so ready to just let go. But you saved me, and in doing so, you gave me this incredible life. I would not trade a single moment of it, not even the difficult times." "I would not either," Owen agreed. "We have been blessed, Grace. Truly blessed." Time moved on, bringing the small joys and sorrows that made up a life. William and Sarah had 2 more children, giving Owen and Grace 3 grandchildren to dote on. Caroline and her husband adopted a child, a young Apache boy orphaned by tragedy, and raised him with the same love and acceptance that Grace and Owen had shown their own children. Thomas eventually married at 25, choosing a practical rancher's daughter who fit into the family seamlessly. In 1915, Owen and Grace celebrated their 38th wedding anniversary quietly at home, too old now for large parties but content with each other's company. They sat on the porch as the stars came out, holding hands and watching their grandchildren play in the yard under their parents' watchful eyes. "You remember what I said that first day I woke up in your cabin?" Grace asked suddenly. "You said you would be mine," Owen replied, the memory as clear as if it had happened yesterday. "And you said you would be mine forever. You have kept that promise, Owen Callahan. Through everything, you have been mine as I have been yours." "Forever," Owen confirmed. "That is what I promised, and that is what I will give you, forever and always." They continued sitting there as darkness fell completely, surrounded by the life they had built together. The ranch stretched out around them, prosperous and thriving. Their children were grown and happy, building their own families and following their own dreams. And through it all, the love between Owen and Grace had remained constant, the foundation upon which everything else was built. Years later, when both of them had passed peacefully into old age and death, their grandchildren would tell the story of how it all began. How Owen found Grace in the snow on that frozen morning in 1877, how she said she would be his, and he promised to be hers forever. It became family legend, repeated at gatherings and passed down through generations. But the true story was not just about that dramatic beginning. It was about the 42 years that followed, the daily choice to love and honor each other, to build a life together against all odds. It was about facing prejudice and fear with courage and grace, about raising children to be proud of who they were, about creating a legacy that would outlast them both. Owen lived to be 73, passing away peacefully in his sleep in the spring of 1923. Grace, heartbroken but determined to live fully until the end, survived him by 3 years, dying at 72 in the summer of 1926. They were buried side by side on a hill overlooking the ranch, their graves marked by simple stones that read their names and the words, "Together forever." Their children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren continued to work the ranch and live in the territory that had become Arizona State in 1912. The school Caroline founded grew and prospered, eventually becoming part of the public school system. William's descendants maintained the ranch, expanding it further over the years. Thomas's children inherited his skill with mechanics and tools, becoming successful in the new industries that grew up in the 20th century. But more than land or businesses or skills, what Owen and Grace left behind was a legacy of love that transcended boundaries. They had proven that 2 people from different worlds could build something beautiful together. that love could overcome prejudice and fear. That family was defined not by blood alone, but by choice and commitment. On winter mornings, when snow occasionally dusted the Arizona desert, some of their descendants would pause and remember the story of how it all began. A cowboy, a girl in the snow, and two simple promises that changed everything. The world around them had changed dramatically, but that core truth remained the same. Love, real love freely given and faithfully kept, was the most powerful force in existence. And in the end, that was the true measure of Owen and Grace's lives. Not the land they accumulated, or the children they raised, or the obstacles they overcame, though all of those were significant. The true measure was the love they shared, constant and unwavering from that first day in 1877, until death finally parted them nearly half a century later. Their story became a reminder that sometimes the most important moments in life come unexpectedly, that salvation can arrive in the form of a stranger on horseback, and that the words, "I will be yours," and "I will be yours forever," can be the beginning of something extraordinary. Every generation of their family learned it, remembered it, and tried to live by the example Owen and Grace had set. In the small cemetery on the hill, through hot summers and occasional snowy winters, their graves remained a testament to that love. Family members would visit, bringing flowers and sharing stories of the legendary couple who started it all. Children would ask to hear the tale again and again, never tiring of the romance and drama of that first meeting in the snow. And somewhere, perhaps in whatever realm exists beyond this life, Owen and Grace walked together still, hand in hand, their love eternal and unbroken. For they had made promises to each other on a winter day long ago, and they had kept those promises through 42 years of joy and struggle, laughter and tears, triumph and heartbreak. She had said, "I will be yours," and she had been, completely and without reservation. He had said, "I will be yours forever," and he had meant it with every fiber of his being, and in the end, forever had been just long enough.